Bolivia has not had a Pacific coastline since 1883. The loss traces directly to the Battle of Angamos, which eliminated Peru's naval capacity to support its Bolivian ally. In 2018, the International Court of Justice ruled against Bolivia's claim that Chile was obligated to negotiate sea access. Bolivia remains landlocked. The territory Chile gained from this naval battle now contains the world's largest lithium reserves, the mineral the global transition to electric vehicles depends on. Bolivia has lithium of its own, but cannot export it through a port it does not have. This naval battle's economic consequences are still shaping global battery supply chains. In 2026, the War of the Pacific, fought between Chile and the allied forces of Peru and Bolivia from 1879 to 1883, was triggered by a dispute over taxation and ownership of nitrate and guano deposits in the Atacama Desert, territory that at the time belonged to Bolivia and Peru. Nitrate, used for fertilizer and explosives before the Haber-Bosch synthetic ammonia process existed, was so economically critical that the Atacama's deposits represented one of the most valuable resource territories on Earth. Guano, accumulated seabird droppings, also a critical fertilizer, had similar value. The war that resulted was fought specifically over which nation would control the export revenues from these deposits. The Battle of Angamos was the decisive naval engagement that determined the war's ultimate outcome. Admiral Miguel Grau commanded the Peruvian ironclad Huascar for nearly a year before Angamos, conducting a campaign of single-ship raiding and blockade disruption against Chilean naval and commercial shipping that made the vessel one of the most celebrated and feared warships in South American naval history. The Huascar, a relatively small ironclad armed with two 10-inch guns and a rotating turret, repeatedly evaded larger Chilean naval forces while disrupting Chile's ability to supply its land campaign and capturing or damaging Chilean vessels. Grau's specific tactical skill, using the Huascar's maneuverability and his detailed knowledge of the Pacific coastline to strike and withdraw before larger Chilean forces could engage, frustrated Chilean naval commanders for months and forced Chile to commit substantial naval resources specifically to hunt down a single ship. Grau's specific reputation for chivalrous conduct, including documented instances of rescuing Chilean sailors from vessels the Huascar had just defeated in combat, and his consistent treatment of captured enemy combatants with respect and humanity, distinguished him as a specific exception to the broader brutality of 19th-century naval warfare. This reputation crossed enemy lines. Chilean naval officers and the Chilean press came to regard Grau with genuine admiration, even as they fought to destroy his ship. The specific historical rarity of an enemy combatant being celebrated by the nation fighting against him during the war itself rather than only afterward makes Grau's reputation one of the most documented examples of cross-conflict military respect in 19th century history. Chile's commitment of multiple ironclads specifically to hunt the Huascar reflected both strategic necessity and a specific personal determination to end Grau's campaign. On October 8, 1879, the Chilean ironclads Cochrane and Blanco Encalada, supported by additional vessels, finally cornered the Huascar near the headland of Angamos on the northern Chilean coast. The Chilean ships possessed significant advantages: superior speed, heavier armor, and more powerful guns than the smaller Huascar. Grau attempted to maneuver and escape as he had successfully done in previous encounters, but the Cochrane's superior speed allowed it to close the distance and engage at close range. The battle that followed lasted approximately 1 hour. Early in the engagement, a shell from the Cochrane struck the Huascar's conning tower directly, killing Admiral Grau instantly. Command passed rapidly through several subordinate officers as they too were killed or incapacitated in the continuing bombardment. The Huascar, having lost its commander and suffered cumulative damage to its steering and armament, was eventually boarded and captured by Chilean forces after approximately 1 hour of combat. The capture of the Huascar was the single most consequential naval event of the War of the Pacific. It eliminated Peru's only effective capital warship and gave Chile uncontested control of the Pacific sea lanes along the South American coast. This naval supremacy allowed Chile to conduct an unopposed amphibious campaign, landing troops to conduct the land invasion that would eventually capture Lima, Peru's capital, in January 1881. Without naval control, Chile's land campaign would have faced supply and logistics vulnerabilities that could have produced a substantially different outcome. The 1-hour battle determined the war's subsequent 2 years. The War of the Pacific's conclusion produced 2 specific treaties that permanently redrew the map of South America's Pacific coast. The Treaty of Ancon, signed with Peru in 1883, transferred the nitrate-rich Tarapacá province permanently to Chile and gave Chile temporary administration of the Tacna and Arica provinces. With a plebiscite to determine their final status that was never actually held, they remained under Chilean control and were formally annexed decades later through subsequent agreements. The 1884 truce and the 1893 treaty with Bolivia transferred the entire Bolivian department of Littoral, Bolivia's only access to the Pacific Ocean, to Chile permanently. Bolivia, which had entered the war as a coastal nation, ended it as a landlocked nation. The specific territorial transformation produced by these treaties has never been reversed. Bolivia's loss of its Pacific coastline has been the central grievance of Bolivian foreign policy for over a century, and the specific subject of the most significant legal action Bolivia has pursued in the international system. In 2013, Bolivia filed a case at the International Court of Justice, arguing that Chile had a legal obligation, arising from decades of diplomatic statements and negotiations, to negotiate sovereign access to the sea for Bolivia. In 2018, the International Court of Justice ruled against Bolivia's claim, finding that while Chile had engaged in various negotiations over the decades, it had no binding legal obligation to grant Bolivia sovereign sea access. The ruling formally closed Bolivia's primary international legal avenue for reversing the consequence of a battle fought in 1879. The territorial outcome of Angamos has now been confirmed as permanent by the highest court available to challenge it. The territory at the center of the War of the Pacific's territorial settlement is now known as the Lithium Triangle, the region spanning northern Chile, northwestern Argentina, and southwestern Bolivia that together hold an estimated 58% of the world's known lithium resources. Lithium, the critical mineral for the rechargeable batteries that power electric vehicles, smartphones, and grid-scale energy storage, has become one of the most strategically significant minerals of the 21st century energy transition. Chile's portion of the Lithium Triangle, including the Salar de Atacama, the territory that Chile gained from the War of the Pacific, is among the most productive lithium extraction regions on Earth. Operated by major international mining companies and generating substantial export revenue for the Chilean state in a specific echo of the nitrate export economy that the same territory generated in the 19th century. Bolivia's specific lithium dilemma is the most direct contemporary economic consequence of Angamos's territorial outcome. Bolivia possesses an estimated 21 million tons of lithium resources in the Salar de Uyuni, among the largest reserves in the world. But Bolivia's landlocked status, the direct consequence of losing its Pacific coastline in the war Angamos decided, means that any lithium Bolivia exports must transit through a foreign port, typically Chilean or Peruvian, adding cost, logistical complexity, and a degree of dependence on the cooperation of the same countries whose historical relationship with Bolivia remains shaped by the territorial dispute. Bolivia's lithium development has been significantly slower than Chile's or Argentina's, for reasons that include this specific structural disadvantage, alongside Bolivia's own policy choices regarding state control of the resource and foreign investment terms. Admiral Miguel Grau's specific historical legacy is the most unusual in this series. He is honored as a national hero by Peru, the nation he served and died for, and is also formally honored by Chile, the nation that killed him and defeated his country. The Chilean Navy includes Grau's conduct in its own officer training curriculum as a model of military honor and chivalry. Chilean naval vessels have historically rendered honors at the site of his death. Peru's Navy headquarters and numerous Peruvian institutions bear his name, and his image appears on Peruvian currency. The specific bilateral honoring of Grau, by victor and defeated alike, represents one of history's most documented examples of military reputation, transcending the national interests of the war in which a commander died. Admiral Miguel Grau's specific historical legacy is the most unusual in this series. He is honored as a national hero by Peru, the nation he served and died for, and is also formally honored by Chile, the nation that killed him and defeated his country. The Chilean Navy includes Grau's conduct in its own officer training curriculum as a model of military honor and chivalry. Chilean naval vessels have historically rendered honors at the site of his death. Peru's Navy headquarters and numerous Peruvian institutions bear his name, and his image appears on Peruvian currency. The specific bilateral honoring of Grau, by victor and defeated alike, represents one of history's Atacama Desert's extraordinary landscape. The territory whose ownership Angamos ultimately decided is the driest non-polar desert on Earth, with some weather stations recording no measurable rainfall for years at a time. The specific extraordinary visual character of the Atacama includes the Val de Luna, with its eroded rock formations resembling a lunar landscape. The Atacama's exceptional clarity, making it one of the world's premier astronomical observation sites, home to the ALMA Observatory and the Plan. At extremely large telescope, and the specific flowering desert phenomenon, the Desierto Florido, in which the Atacama's dormant seeds bloom into vast fields of wildflowers following rare rainfall events, transforming the world's driest desert into one of its most spectacular floral displays approximately once per 5 to 7 years. As most documented examples of military reputation, transcending the national interests of the war in which a commander died. Angamos' specific contribution to the Decisive Battle series is the demonstration that territorial outcomes decided by military force can produce economic consequences that persist and transform across multiple resource eras without the underlying territorial settlement ever being revisited. The Atacama was valuable for nitrate in 1879. It became valuable for copper through the 20th century. It is valuable for lithium in the 21st. 3 distinct resource economies, 3 distinct centuries, 1 unchanged territorial settlement produced by 1 naval battle that lasted approximately 1 hour. The series developing argument adds a specific dimension here. Decisive battles do not merely decide their own era's stakes. They decide which nation controls whatever resource value the same territory will generate across however many subsequent centuries and resource transitions follow. Angamos' contemporary diplomatic relevance in 2026 extends beyond the Bolivia, Chile dispute into the broader strategic competition over lithium supply chains that the United States, China, and the European Union are actively pursuing as part of their respective electric vehicle and battery industrial policies. China's substantial investment in Chilean and Argentine lithium extraction and processing infrastructure, American efforts to secure alternative lithium supply chains, partly motivated by concerns about Chinese market dominance, and the specific ongoing negotiations between Bolivia and multiple international partners regarding lithium development, represent the contemporary geopolitical layer built atop a territorial settlement that a 19th century naval battle produced. The lithium competition of 2026 is occurring within the specific territorial boundaries that Angamos and the war it decided established a century and a half earlier. Angamos' specific lesson for the Decisive Battle series is that territorial control, once militarily settled, can generate value across resource eras its original combatants never imagined, and that this generational persistence makes military outcomes more permanent and more consequential than the immediate post-war settlement suggests. Nobody fighting at Angamos in 1879 knew what lithium was, let alone that the territory they were fighting over would one day be valued for it. The naval battle's combatants fought over nitrate and guano. Their descendants' nations now compete over lithium on the same map. The series' developing framework adds this specific dimension. Decisive battles can decide the ownership of value that does not yet exist at the time the battle is fought, making their consequences open-ended in ways no participant could anticipate. 1 hour off a headland called Angamos, 1 admiral killed at his conning tower, 1 ship captured, 1 nation's coastline transferred permanently to another, 1 international court of justice ruling, 139 years later, confirming the outcome cannot be reversed. 1 desert that produced nitrate, then copper, then lithium, 3 resource economies on 1 unchanged territorial map. Bolivia still landlocked. Chile still extracting. The Admiral both nations still honor. The series continues next episode with the Battle of Khalkhin Gol in 1939. The border conflict between Japan and the Soviet Union that convinced Japan to attack south toward Pearl Harbor instead of north toward Siberia, fundamentally redirecting the entire trajectory of the Second World War in the Pacific. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. The desert blooms once every 5 to 7 years. The lithium keeps being extracted. The series continues.